Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new reporting video analysis. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, let's go get into our morning briefing by the Washington Post. Before we begin, ladies and gentlemen, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and enjoy for more legal breaking news that you need to know about and more.
President Donald Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota. That's where we're starting the 7 from the Washington Post. I'm Hannah Jewell. It's Friday, January 16th. Let's get you caught up with today's 7 stories. Federal agents have flooded the streets of Minneapolis in recent days. They have detained people, pulled them from their vehicles, stopped U.S. citizens, and shot 2 people. One of them, Renee Good, was killed. Residents have responded with protests. But in a post on Truth Social yesterday, President Trump said that if what he called attacks on federal officers were not stopped by state authorities, he would invoke the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act enables a president to deploy the military domestically in extraordinary circumstances. Invoking it empowers the military to make arrests and perform searches on U.S. soil. The act was last invoked in 1992 during the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. It has not been used without the consent of a state's governor for 60 years. Number 2 is a Post exclusive. A medical examiner may classify the death of a man in ICE custody as a homicide. On January 3rd, ICE announced the death of detainee Geraldo Lunas Campos at a Texas detention camp. In a statement, the agency said staff observed him in distress and gave no cause of death. An employee of El Paso County's Office of the Medical Examiner gave more details this week in a conversation with Lunas Campos's daughter. She shared a recording of their conversation with the Post. In the clip, the employee said a doctor is, quote, listing the preliminary cause of death as asphyxia due to neck and chest compression. That means Lunas Campos did not get enough oxygen because of pressure on his neck and chest. Pending the results of a toxicology report, the staffer said the doctor will most likely list the manner of death as homicide. An official with the Department of Homeland Security said Lunas Campos died after attempting to take his own life. Number 3. President Trump accepted a Nobel Peace Prize medal from Venezuela's opposition leader. María.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, note that he accepted and stole the prize in violation of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee's rules and the law. Ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, let's get back into the reporting.
María Corina Machado won the Peace Prize last year. Yesterday at the White House, she gave her medal to Trump. The gesture came 12 days after the U.S. president toppled Venezuela's longtime leader, Nicolas Maduro. Machado's move was a bold attempt to win Trump's favor. He recently decided to preserve ties with Venezuela's existing regime instead of supporting her challenge to it. Machado explained her decision yesterday, drawing a parallel to historical revolutionary figures.
I presented the President of the United States the medal of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I told him this, listen to this. 200 years ago, General Lafayette gave Simón Bolívar a medal with George Washington's face on it.
Lafayette was a French military officer who fought alongside Washington in the Revolutionary War. Simón Bolívar won independence for parts of South America from the Spanish Empire. Machado's move sparked a sharp reaction from the Norwegian Nobel Committee, which said a prize cannot be re-awarded to another person. Number 4. A federal judge said that members of Trump's cabinet conspired to violate the Constitution. U.S. District Judge William Young was appointed to the federal bench by President Ronald Reagan. In September, he ruled that senior administration officials engaged in an illegal effort to arrest and deport non-citizen students based on their pro-Palestinian activism. At a hearing in Boston yesterday in that case, Young decried what he said were breathtaking constitutional violations by senior Trump administration officials. He said cabinet secretaries were not honoring the First Amendment, and he called Trump an authoritarian. The White House responded, accusing the judge of left-wing activism. Number 5. a new poll shows who Americans blame for political violence. The Public Religion Research Institute has a new survey about the causes of political violence in the U.S. The polling reveals deep partisan divides, but it also shows that there are some things Americans can agree on. 67% of survey respondents said political leaders who don't condemn violent language from their supporters are to blame, and 64% point to AI-generated misinformation that spreads on social media. However, a majority of Democrats and Republicans blame each other, and independents are 10 percentage points more likely to say right-wing groups are more responsible for political violence than left-wing groups. The polling also found that most Americans across party lines and religions do not support violent or hostile acts. You can see more results from the survey in our newsletter today. Find the link to that in our show notes. Science shows that very different psychiatric disorders might have the same cause. That's number 6. In a sweeping new study for the journal Nature, scientists analyzed the records of millions of people with and without 14 different psychiatric disorders. They found that genetic similarities among the 14 disorders suggest that they fall into 5 essential categories. For example, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia share about 70% of the same genetic drivers. Some scientists think the findings could lead to a revolution in the way psychiatric disorders are diagnosed and treated, placing more emphasis on the biological roots of mental health problems, and they think that could streamline treatments. But others are more skeptical about an approach that could lump together different patients with very different needs. And at number 7, a surprise baby terrapin was born at the Smithsonian's National Zoo in D.C. For about a decade, 4 painted river terrapins have lived at the National Zoo, 2 males and 2 females. But the critically endangered species of turtle hadn't ever managed to successfully breed there, until recently. The newest terrapin's arrival is all the more special because zookeepers knew nothing about its conception. The animal's mother camouflaged its nest, and nobody knew the baby was coming. It was found a day or 2 after it hatched last summer. Now about 5 months old, the creature is doing well. But there's still some mystery surrounding the baby terrapin. Zookeepers aren't sure which adult terrapins are its parents, and it could take several years for experts to figure out its gender. If you'd like to see pictures of the baby terrapin, head over to our newsletter. That's the show for this week. The associate producer of The 7 is Taylor White. The staff writers are Jamie Ross, Izan Akabau, and me. Special thanks to Marjan Meshkot. John Taylor is our editor. Additional editing by Christina Quinn. Copy editing by Melissa No and Thomas Haliba. Mixing and sound design is by Jim Briggs and Justin Garish. Our theme music is by Edith Mudge. I'm Hannah Jewell. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend. We'll be off Monday for MLK Day, but we'll share a special episode, and then we'll be back as usual on Tuesday.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our second recording. Following the reporting of the morning briefing by Washington Post for your Friday morning, January 16, 2026. Before we begin, ladies and gentlemen, please make sure that you like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy for more legal breaking news that you need to know about and more on the side of politics. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's get into the reporting, ladies and gentlemen, by the Hill for the second reporting following the morning briefing by Washington Post.
Bacon says he would lean toward Trump impeachment if Greenland invaded. Utter buffoonery by Ashley Fields. Representative Don Bacon, Republican from Nebraska, said Wednesday he would consider impeaching President Trump if the U.S. decides to invade Greenland, which he described as utter buffoonery. It is ridiculous that this has to even be done, Bacon told the Omaha World Herald. But when the president talks about taking Greenland one way or the other way every day this last week or so, and that it is unacceptable if Greenland refuses to be part of the United States. I felt like I needed to make a statement that Republicans disagree. It is utter buffoonery to think that we should compel Greenland to be part of the United States, he added. The Nebraska Republicans' comments come as Trump has ramped up rhetoric around annexing the semi-autonomous Danish territory for national security purposes. Despite pushback from lawmakers, Greenland, Denmark, and other NATO allies, the Arctic island is rich with natural resources and serves as home to a U.S. Space Force base. Greenland's alliance with Washington came to fruition after World War II and was solidified through the 1941 Defense of Greenland Treaty, which let the U.S. build bases, later formalized by the 1951 Defense Agreement with Denmark. You do not treat allies that way. You do that with Russia or China, Iran. But do not treat your best friends like a piece of excrement, Bacon said of the Trump administration's swipes at Greenland and its officials. That is what he is doing. I think it is totally wrong to treat your best friends like this and bully them, the lawmaker added. Other Republicans have shared similar concerns regarding the potential use of military force to acquire Greenland amid proposals to purchase the territory. The actual execution of anything that would involve a taking of a sovereign territory that is part of a sovereign nation, I think would be met with pretty substantial opposition in Congress. Senator Tom Tillis, North Carolina said, "Right now, people are trying to be deferential, but this is just an example of whoever keeps on telling the president that this idea is achievable should not be in Washington, D.C., he added. Both Tillis and Bacon are set to retire at the end of the term, though some of their colleagues seeking re-election have also offered staunch criticism of the president's foreign policy measures. I do not support the president's plan to annex Greenland by either force or by buying it over the opposition of people in Greenland and Denmark, a NATO ally. Senate Appropriations Committee Chair Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, told The Hill on Wednesday, "I do believe that Greenland would be amenable to the U.S. expanding its base that already exists there, or its military presence to send a message to China, Russia, but that can be done through diplomatic negotiations, not through threats and intimidation," she said. Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, echoed the sentiment. "Greenland, the Danes are allies," he said. "We cannot do military action in Greenland." Should not cannot. Bacon also joined House Democrats earlier this month to introduce legislation called the No Funds for NATO Invasion Act to prohibit the use of federal funds for an invasion of any NATO member state or NATO-protected territory.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our third reporting following the reporting by The Hill. That, ladies and gentlemen, was honestly good news for the American people today. Without further ado, let's get into our third reporting by the New York Times, ladies and gentlemen.
Agent who shot Renee Good was trained to track and apprehend fugitives. This article is by Katie J.M. Baker and read by an automated voice. Jonathan Ross stood before a small group of his fellow students at Anderson University in Indiana and cautioned that the war in Iraq was not the one they were seeing on television. It was April 2006, and the 23-year-old was recently back from a National Guard deployment to Iraq, speaking at a Support the Troops event hosted by the college Republicans. Mr. Ross showed the students photos of charred Humvees and walls pockmarked with bullet holes. "We just got armor from the dump," he said, describing how they outfitted their vehicles. "They didn't supply us with the trucks you see on the news at all." 20 years later, Mr. Ross, now an agent with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is once again on the front lines of a polarizing mission: the Trump administration's aggressive immigration crackdown in Minnesota. On January 7th, during an enforcement surge in South Minneapolis, Mr. Ross fired 3 shots into a moving SUV, killing Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of 3. Her partner, Becca, who recorded the standoff on her phone, later said the couple had stopped to support our neighbors after federal agents were spotted in their neighborhood. President Trump and other federal officials have said that Mr. Ross acted in self-defense when he killed Ms. Good, and have accused her of driving at him or even running him over. Minnesota officials have called the administration's accounts propaganda and garbage. A New York Times analysis of videos of the shooting contradicts the claim that Mr. Ross was run over, and suggests Ms. Good was steering away from him at the time he opened fire. Chris Maddle, a Republican candidate for governor of Minnesota, has said he is representing Mr. Ross. He did not respond to requests for comment. The career trajectory of Mr. Ross from the National Guard to the Border Patrol, and finally to a tactical ICE unit, mirrors a broader post-9/11 project, the steady militarization of the border and the agencies that police it. Mr. Ross joined the Indiana National Guard in 2002, a year after graduating from high school in Peoria, Illinois in November 2004. He deployed to Iraq and was there for a year, during a time when the insurgency was growing increasingly violent. He served as a gunner in convoys for his logistics unit, but nothing in his record suggests he saw combat. Days before he deployed, Mr. Ross married for the first time. By the time he returned from Iraq, he had filed for divorce. According to records, the couple had no children or real estate to divide. The final decree simply required his ex-wife to return her engagement and wedding rings, and Mr. Ross to pay her $3,000. He spent the next 2 years at Anderson University, a Christian liberal arts college in Indiana. Michael Smith, a former dorm mate, remembered Mr. Ross as a quiet, dependable student who didn't participate in the campus party scene. He was a little more mature than the rest of us, Mr. Smith said. He said Mr. Ross rarely discussed his time in Iraq. Mr. Ross graduated in 2007 with a degree in both business administration and psychology. That year, he left the Indiana National Guard to join the U.S. Border Patrol near El Paso, Texas. He joined as the agency was racing to meet a Bush administration mandate to expand the force by the end of 2008, effectively doubling its size compared to the start of the administration. As a result of the push, many veterans joined, said Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the U.S. and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. He said it was tough for many of the veterans to go from a military mindset to one of law enforcement. It is very difficult for those trained to interpret threats in war zones to pivot to a role where they must view a person as a community member, Mr. Payan said. Critics have pointed to the mid-2000s hiring wave as a turning point for the agency's culture. A 2013 American Immigration Council report on the use of force policies of U.S. Customs and Border Protection found an organizational subculture that fostered a systematic problem of mistreatment of migrants while in custody. A 2013 policy review commissioned by the agency and conducted by the Police Executive Research Forum urged the agency to make significant changes. It specifically recommended prohibiting agents from shooting at moving vehicles unless the occupants were attempting to use deadly force other than the vehicle against the agent. In a statement, U.S. Customs and Border Protection said it has always prided itself in the training of its officers and agents, and at no point has the integrity or quality of the training been compromised. Carl Quaney, who served as a Border Patrol agent from 2008 to 2010 as part of the El Paso sector, described the mission of the agency as a vital defense against narcotics and international terrorists. He said he remembered Mr. Ross from his time there, but that they didn't work together. As a former member of the Marine Corps who had deployed to Iraq, Mr. Quaney said the assets and support available at the Border Patrol made the job feel like being back in the military again. When Mr. Ross arrived at the El Paso sector, it was relatively quiet, despite a drug cartel war taking place across the Rio Grande in Juarez, Mexico, some experts said. Mr. Ross said in a 2025 court case that his duties included standard line watch and tracking. He also worked as a field intelligence agent, analyzing raw data to map cartel operations and the mechanics of human and drug smuggling. By 2015, he had married again and taken a job with ICE in Minnesota. That year, Mr. Ross bought a large home near the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Chaska, a city about 30 minutes southwest of where the shooting took place in Minneapolis. One neighbor who declined to give his name out of fear of retribution said that the house had signage supporting Trump around the presidential election, and that a "Don't Tread on Me" flag had waved from the front porch. He said he had seen children playing on the front lawn. As a team leader for ICE enforcement and removal operations in St. Paul, Mr. Ross focused on fugitive operations to track and apprehend higher value targets, he later said in court testimony. He described coordinating with the FBI and ATF to oversee the surveillance and execution of arrest warrants. He said he was also a firearms instructor and investigated transnational organized crime and national security cases. Mr. Ross was also part of a cohort inside ICE known as the Special Response Team that is trained to handle more dangerous situations. In 2025, SRT members were sent across the nation to cities where Mr. Trump's immigration crackdown had spurred mass protests, including Los Angeles, Chicago, and elsewhere. One law enforcement officer who has worked with Mr. Ross described him as a thorough agent who would go down rabbit holes in search of undocumented immigrants. Mr. Ross mostly avoided bringing up politics in his workplace, said the colleague, who requested anonymity to protect himself from retribution. The agency was dealing with a huge amount of burnout, the law enforcement officer said. Across the U.S., ICE officers were being pushed to conduct more arrests and operations than ever before to hit lofty arrest goals dictated from Washington, D.C. In June 2025, Mr. Ross led a multi-agency team to arrest a Guatemalan man who had been convicted of sexual abuse in Minnesota. After a pursuit, the driver, Roberto Carlos Munoz Guatemala, had refused to exit his vehicle, prompting Mr. Ross to shatter a window, according to a federal affidavit which stated he was then dragged nearly 100 yards at high speeds after reaching into the man's car. Mr. Ross later testified that he feared for his life during the incident and suffered a severe forearm gash and required 33 stitches across his face and limbs. Use of force experts told the Times that by reaching into the vehicle, Mr. Ross had disregarded standard law enforcement training. Last month, a jury convicted Mr. Munoz Guatemala of assaulting Mr. Ross. 6 months later, the dragging incident has become a key point in the national debate surrounding the shooting of Ms. Good. For some of his supporters, including top administration officials, it explains his lethal response to Ms. Good as a defensive reflex. The officer was in fear of his own life, the lives of his fellow officers, and acted in self-defense, said Tricia McLaughlin, a spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security. She said that ICE officers are trained to use the minimum amount of force necessary to resolve dangerous situations, and that the agency prioritizes public and officer safety through de-escalation tactics and regular ongoing use of force training. To Mr. Ross's critics, however, the incident is evidence of a high-risk approach that favors counterinsurgency-style aggression over careful policing. In court last December regarding the dragging case, Mr. Ross testified that he was dragged while screaming at the top of my lungs for Mr. Munoz Guatemala to slow down. On January 7th, when Ms. Good began to drive instead of getting out of her SUV as ordered by ICE agents, Mr. Ross, who was bracing himself against her vehicle with one arm, fired 3 times, killing her. On footage from Mr. Ross's own cell phone, there are no pleas for the car to stop. Instead, the video shows the car careening down the street. Mr. Ross can be heard muttering, according to a Times audio and video analysis, "fucking bitch." Hamda Lizis, Christina Morales, Nicholas Bogle-Burrows, Jamie McGee, Reyes Mata-3, Alicia Garceau, and Matt Schwartz contributed reporting. Kirsten Noyes and Kitty Bennett contributed research.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that what he did by yelling fucking bitch is not gonna help his case. He willingly braced himself up against the car and shot her for no apparent reason. She wasn't doing any harm, no nothing. She was leaving, like the ICE officers told her to do. Really ridiculous. Ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, let's get into our fourth reporting by The Hill, by the Washington Post. By The Hill. Ladies and gentlemen.
Oh shit. Fuck you up, you better go lay down.
Stephen A. Smith, Trump will cost GOP midterms, possibly White House, by Sarah Davis. Sports commentator Stephen A. Smith warned Thursday that the Trump administration's policies could cause Republicans to lose this year's midterms. To all the Republicans out there, to all the conservatives out there, you are about to lose the midterms, Smith said during an episode of his SiriusXM show. You are going to lose, and you might lose the presidency in 2028. And it is going to be at the fault of your president, Donald Trump. He claimed Trump is blowing it, pointing to escalating tensions over the administration's immigration crackdown in Minnesota and his failure to meet campaign promises to lower the cost of living. He is blowing it for himself. He is going to blow it for the GOP. He is going to blow it for Congress. He is going to blow it for the Senate. And he is likely going to blow it for the White House. All because of what I said from day one. The man do not know how to act, Smith said. He added that the president's claim to return to the country to normalcy falls short amid the deployment of federal agents to the North Star State. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, is expected to send more than 2,000 agents to Minnesota as part of its immigration operations in the state. Ongoing protests over the January 7th fatal shooting of Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother, by an Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, officer have led to intense clashes between federal officials and demonstrators. The demonstrations were exacerbated a week later by a second ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis. The incidents have sparked concerns among Democrats who have called for DHS reforms. What we are hearing about is chaos, 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 and oh my lord, we do not need to see this again, Smith said. We do not need to see this again. He added, that is what you are hearing about, and you are hearing a president that does not know how to be quiet. The commentary comes after Trump threatened to use the Insurrection Act to deploy more troops to the city, and as affordability concerns mount over the rising cost of living and health care premiums that spiked after the expiration of Affordable Care Act subsidies last year.
I haven't seen this Christmas. It's all good. That's okay. So you can file that with your senior point.
Video analysis of ICE shooting sheds light on contested moments. This article is by the New York Times and read by an automated voice. President Trump and members of his administration have said that Renee Good, the woman killed by a federal agent in Minneapolis on January 7th, weaponized her vehicle against the agent who shot her, an interpretation they claim is confirmed by the agent's cell phone video. She didn't try to run him over, Mr. Trump said on the day of the shooting. She ran him over. That description has been contested by local and state officials who have blamed the federal government for the tension, saying aggressive tactics that violate police protocol had stirred unrest. Demonstrators have taken to the streets nationwide to protest the killing of Ms. Good, a U.S. citizen. The administration has responded by sending 1,000 additional agents to Minnesota. In a video analysis, the Times focuses on some of the key contested moments of the agent's cell phone video alongside other footage. More videos are likely to emerge, but the visual evidence shows no indication that the agent who fired the shots, Jonathan Ross, had been run over. The footage provides visibility into the positioning between the agent and Ms. Good's SUV and the key moments of escalation. It also establishes how Mr. Ross put himself in a dangerous position near her vehicle in the first place.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our last reporting and final reporting, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin, please like, comment, share, subscribe.
Her chewing on her own shit, she's
For
loud.
more legal breaking news.
Where'd he go? Hey! Really, Scooby?
GOP senators try to talk Trump down from invoking Insurrection Act in Minneapolis. By Alexander Bolton. Republican senators are trying to put the brakes on talk of invoking the Insurrection Act to quell angry protests against immigration officers in Minneapolis after one fatally shot a 37-year-old mother of 3, Renee Good. Invoking the law, which was last updated in 1874, would allow President Trump to mobilize active duty troops or federalized National Guard troops to the streets of Minneapolis amid growing civil unrest over actions by immigration and customs enforcement ICE officers. GOP lawmakers are leery of the prospect of sending a wave of troops to Minneapolis when images of masked ICE officers, wearing helmets and ballistic-resistant vests, engaged in heated exchanges with protesters have dominated television and online news in recent days. Asked if invoking the Insurrection Act to deploy troops to Minneapolis to quell the protests would be appropriate, Senate Armed Services Committee Chair Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, responded, "Probably not." Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, said the administration needs to be very careful to lower the potential for conflict with local communities during ICE law enforcement operations. "I have felt that since the fatal shooting of Good a week or so ago that we needed to be very careful, very cautious in how we proceed. Not only in Minnesota but in other areas to keep the conflict. The potential for conflict as it relates to ICE enforcement dialed back," she said. "I have said several times that this feels like a climate that we went through during the time of George Floyd." She added, referring to the Black Lives Matter protests that swept the country after the death of George Floyd, a black man during a confrontation with police in Minneapolis in 2020. "Everything was just so tenuous and so volatile. We do not need that," she added. Tensions on the streets of Minneapolis have boiled over since Good was shot in the head by an ICE officer last week after she failed to comply with an order to exit her vehicle, which was partially blocking a street during an ICE operation. She put her car into reverse and then into drive as one ICE officer tried to open her locked driver's side door and another stood partly in front of her vehicle. The Trump administration announced Monday that it would send 1,000 additional immigration officers to Minnesota to dramatically expand the federal law enforcement presence in the state. On Thursday, Trump threatened to trigger the Insurrection Act if Minnesota public officials did not crack down on protesters who have tried to disrupt ICE operations. If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota do not obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of 1CE, who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, which many presidents have done before me, and quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place in that once great state. He posted on Truth Social. The more than 200-year-old law was last invoked in 1992 to restore the peace during the riots that broke out after a jury acquitted 4 Los Angeles Police Department officers of using excessive force in arresting Rodney King, a black man. The beating of King was captured in a video that inflamed racial tensions in the city. In that instance, however, use of the law came at the request of California's governor. Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, called for cooler heads to prevail when asked about Trump's threat to trigger the Insurrection Act. "I think that we need to calm the country down, not head further toward chaos," he said. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, tried to downplay Trump's threat but called on local officials to work with law enforcement to settle things down. "I think he has threatened that in other places, other states too. We will see what happens there. Hopefully the local officials working with not only the federal law enforcement, ICE and other agencies, but also the local law enforcement officials will be able to settle things down," he said. Usually, the Posse Comitatus Act forbids federal armed forces from being deployed for domestic policing actions. The president may deploy troops to impose order domestically, however, if certain conditions are met. The law allows the president to deploy troops without a request from the state in order to enforce the laws or to suppress rebellion, according to an analysis by the Brennan Center for Justice. GOP lawmakers broadly support Trump's immigration policies and voted to give the Department of Homeland Security a huge infusion of spending in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last year. Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, said he would need to research the law to respond to Trump's threat to invoke the Insurrection Act, but he expressed frustration over protesters' tactics in Minnesota. Something has got to be done, though. People who are baiting these ICE agents, people who are blocking their way, people who are burning Christmas trees, people who are spitting in their face, people who are blowing whistles in their ears need stop, he said. But Kennedy acknowledged that some ICE officers may have acted unprofessionally. I am not saying every single ICE agent is blameless, he said. Whether you agree or disagree with the issue, illegal immigration is illegal. Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, said the Trump administration appears poised to send troops to Minnesota. I read a really interesting thread, laying out exactly how the Trump administration has laid down all the markers, done all the precursor steps to actually invoking the act. I certainly hope it does not come to that, he said. I hope the radical left will stop obstructing these lawful enforcement actions.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this extended legal breaking reporting video analysis update. We are unfortunately running out of time for this legal breaking reporting video analysis update to extend. So please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy for more legal breaking news that you need to know about and more on the side of politics. And I will see you in about an hour and a half or so for our next legal breaking reporting video analysis update and much more on the side of politics that you need to know about. See you in, as I said, about an hour and a half for our second legal breaking reporting, but more than probably one legal reporting in the next reporting video analysis update or update.